Gentlemen, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us here at the Belgrade Security Forum. My name is Vesna DAMJANIĆ and I'm Chief Editor of Economic Department at Serbian Broadcasting Corporation, RTS. I'm very glad that I could present you and welcome you, Mr. David Landsman, who is in London. Mr. Landsman, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us here.
Good morning. I just wish I would.
Mr. Landsman, he will give us his view from London about very important topics at this moment. It is like pandemia, it is Brexit, it is Western Balkan, and it is very important that he will be our participant because he has a very good view, because he was here in Serbia 20 years ago as a diplomat. He is a very British diplomat and businessman, and at this very moment he is the chairman of British Serbia Chamber of Commerce. And first question to you, Mr. Landsman, how do you see Serbia today, 23 years after that you were here in Belgrade?
Good morning. Yes, it's a very long time ago, and I have visited Belgrade many times since I left as a diplomat. And I think that a huge amount has changed. I talk to friends who tell me everything has changed and everything is much better. I do talk to some friends who tell me not a lot has changed, some things are worse. I think when you are at a distance, you can see some perspective, which gives you something that it's very hard to see about your own country when you're on the ground. I think a huge amount has changed. We really must be grateful for the peace that we have today, and the fact that the world looks a very different place from the way it looked back then. If you look from the business point of view, because now, as you say, I'm the chairman of the British Serbian Chamber of Commerce, and I'm no longer a diplomat, I'm a businessman. We see the businesses of the countries of the region cooperating with each other very much more than they did back then. We see companies in one country operating in all the others in the region very satisfactorily. We see the chambers of commerce working together. There's even I think Western Balkans 6 union of chambers of commerce. People work with people and businesses work with businesses, and that's, in my view, how you create not just peace, but you create prosperity. And although I used to be a diplomat, so of course I think diplomacy is very important. Diplomats don't create worlds as much as everybody else creates worlds. People create worlds, businesses create worlds. And I think you have created a better world today than we had when I lived in Belgrade back then. And I think the prospects for the future, and I hope we can talk a bit about the future, prospects for the future are good.
For all of that, very important is to have political stability. At this very moment at Western Balkan, how do you see political situation?
Well, I think you're right to talk about geopolitical stability, because I think the world is clearly changing very quickly. The pandemic has accelerated trends. Whether it created new ones, it's far too soon to see, but it's certainly accelerated some trends. We've been seeing a differentiation between the US and China now for some time, but the pandemic has really accelerated that. I think in some areas it will accelerate it will slow down globalization. There will be some areas where we used to talk about just in time, so that you could make components of, let's say, cars anywhere in the world, and they could arrive just in time to be assembled. Now people are starting to talk about just in case, because people want to see more resilience. We can see how global supply chains can be broken for political reasons, but also for practical reasons like the pandemic. And so countries are going to want in some areas perhaps to concentrate their supply chain closer to home, so that's a bit less globalization. On the other hand, I think we're going to see more acceleration in technology, and technology and services can be globalized more than they have been in the past. And you only have to think back to, I have to think back when I was in Serbia in the late 1990s and how much technology has moved on since those days and what opportunities that has brought, for example, to the IT business in various countries in the Western Balkans. So I think there are opportunities as well as some risks there. I'd like to think about the geopolitical implications for the Western Balkans in a sort of an economic way. It seems to me that the most developed countries of the West have had, during the pandemic, the lowest pain threshold. They've had to take tough action for a long period of time and spend huge sums of money on compensating citizens and business for the disruption. That's going to cost them dearly. Of course, every country pretty well in the world has been suffering from the pandemic, and those who can continue to borrow on the market will be able to survive and rebuild their economies. The IMF has said this is certainly not a time to be constraining fiscally too much because countries who can afford to borrow will be able to continue to do so. Interest rates are at historic low levels, so that's fine. So there's going to be a problem for those countries with very large debts who can't borrow. And there's going to be a problem, on the other hand, for those very developed markets with that very low pain threshold and this huge cost that's got to be financed and has got to be found for what they've done over the past few months. So I think there's some real opportunities for countries which fall kind of nicely in between, countries which have not incurred so much expenditure over the past few months, but also do not have those huge levels of debt which make it impossible for them to sustain the public finances. And I think the Western Balkans falls into that category. So I think there's an economic opportunity there. And I guess the question is there a business opportunity there? And I think this kind of globalization we're going into, on the geopolitical side, it's a kind of a more multipolar world, there's no doubt about that. But also because of the opportunities that come from technology, I think there will be some opportunities for businesses and therefore people and countries in the Western Balkans to, if you like, reinvent themselves. I think we're all going to have to do that, reinvent themselves after the pandemic and come out in a stronger position.
Mr. Landsman, you have said that this pandemic could be a challenge, but also a big problem for some countries. What about Serbia as one small but open market country? Do you see some timeline how to get over this economic crisis because of the pandemic?
Well, I guess if we all knew the answers to those questions, we'd be thoroughly successful just now. We're still very much, it seems, in the middle of the pandemic. At least we don't know how long it still has to go. But as I say, I think there are some serious opportunities for countries in the Western Balkans, for Serbia, to look for it at its trading links, to look at how fundamentally, ever since I was in the region, we've been talking about European integration, we've been talking about getting closer to the European Union. To me, this is a little bit like being at school. Being successful at school isn't about just passing the exam. It's not just about ticking the boxes to get into the European Union, whenever that may happen. That's not even, frankly, in the gift of any African country right now. But what you're actually doing when you're at school is trying to learn those skills which are going to help you in life. Well, what countries which are reforming, changing, developing in order to meet the criteria of the European Union are really doing is should be doing is doing those things for their own benefit. And I suppose I'm thinking of two tests for that, which are not about what's the accession date to the European Union. It's about how do you attract more business into your country, more investors, more foreign businesses to set up. And I know Serbia's had a very good record of foreign investment over the past few years, because foreign business, international business, whether you're Serbia or whether you're Britain or anywhere else, helps in all sort of ways. It grows, obviously, it grows your economy, but it also brings in new business practices. It brings in diversity in business in one way or another, which strengthens the country. So to me, the first thing is, what do you do to bring in new business, take advantage of those opportunities? And I would have thought that IT, technology, is one big area for Serbia, as well as, of course, building on the success that you've already had in terms of attracting investment, manufacturing, and other kinds of investment into the country. But the other side of that, which is really important, is what to do to attract young people back to the country. I know the demographics are very challenging, and a real success criterion for me is when young people who have left the country bring their talents back to the country because they want to come back and be part of a success story. I was ambassador in Greece during the first years of the debt crisis there. And one of the things that's been very gratifying in recent years is to see slowly but surely young people with talents, with skills coming back to the country and seeing new business opportunities. I think that's a real test. So getting those kind of things right is really, to me, what that kind of development, European integration should really be about.
And also it is a big question for you because you are the head of the British Serbian Chamber of Commerce. You have announced a year ago when it was started, your mandate, that one of your tasks will be to make close relations between Serbian and a British company. Did you success about that? Did you
have
have
we
success?
have we passed the test? I don't know. It's early days, but I think what we are doing is seeing an increased interest from companies in Britain and in Serbia in doing business with each other. We have a number of new members who've joined the chamber who are interested in strengthening those links. I think that Brexit will mean that the UK focuses a lot more on markets like the Western Balkans. You haven't seen perhaps much of that yet as you might, and that's frankly because we haven't yet completed the Brexit process and the pandemic has clearly intervened. But I think in terms of long-term strategy, you'll see a government which is, and I know the British government is very committed indeed to working with countries of the Western Balkans, working with Serbia and its neighbours in terms of business, in terms of security, in terms of tackling global issues together, particularly the challenge of climate change. But I think businesses too will begin to see more opportunities in countries which they've probably not taken seriously enough over the years. I mean, I regularly say to British businesses when I'm encouraging them to look at Serbia and encouraging them to look at the region, I don't say you have to believe me, just look at businesses from other countries in Europe who have successfully invested, who have successfully established themselves. And that message is getting through. I'm convinced it's getting through. And I'm convinced that once we've got over the final stages of Brexit at the end of this year, and British companies look at where opportunities lie for collaboration in the future, I think they will be looking very much at countries which are nearby, but perhaps not ones they've taken seriously enough so far. And I should just say that as a British Serbian Chamber of Commerce, we are a bilateral chamber. We operate in both directions. And we also work very much with Serbian companies to help them operate in the UK. And we have a number from manufacturing companies to food and textile products, as well as other kinds of, if you like, invisible exports in terms of technology services and so on. So I think there are some good opportunities. The fact you haven't seen all of that delivered yet, I don't think means you won't see it. I think we just have to look at this in a slightly longer term perspective.
So you are trying to say that, and you want to say that for Serbia, actually Brexit is a good news because British company will pay more attention to our country after Brexit.
I think there's a very good prospect of that. I think that the thing you know about business is you take opportunities when you find them and you make them good news. So I think we can make Brexit good news, absolutely.
So how Brexit will change European Union? How do you see that? Because you have said the process is not still over, but it's at his very end. So how this will change European Union regarding that Serbia want to be member of European Union?
I think that's a rather difficult question for me to answer, and I think it's a rather difficult question to answer at this particular moment because I suspect no one's mind, whether that's in Belgrade or Brussels, is 100% focused on that while we have the pandemic still with us. I always said when I was talking to people as a British diplomat about this, the real issue is not the date of accession, it's not how those negotiations go, as much as how attractive the country makes itself for its role in Europe and for its business with the world, and how the countries in the region work with each other. And I used to annoy people sometimes when I said, you can't expect to be integrated with Brussels if you can't be integrated with your neighbours. And I think there's so much that can be done and from which countries in the region get real benefit, whatever the diplomacy is, however long it takes, whatever the situation in Brussels is. I think the European Union, as I see it from where I am now in London, will always want the success of Western Balkans integration if it can justify it. The thing you notice about organisations, I certainly noticed as a diplomat, is they always like success stories. They want a positive result if they can get one. There's no particular pleasure for them in failing to achieve things they've committed to achieve. So I'm sure the door will remain open, and I'm sure there's plenty that could be done on the way there, which will be of real economic as well as political benefit for the country.
Sometimes it seems that the economy goes very well regarding EU integration, but also cooperation with our neighbors. But politics is that main obstacle, and political relations, especially in this region. And I know that you are familiar with our situation since you have been ambassador in Albania, in Greece, and you were here. So how do you see what is main input of that? How to overall that political issue?
I think the facts kind of speak for themselves. And if a country takes the steps it needs to take to make its systems more transparent and effective, if it collaborates with its neighbors, if the rule of law applies, then A, you are going to be a more prosperous country in the process, and B, you will have achieved the objectives of the European accession process as well. I think the two things are different, but they both tend in the same direction. I'm not going to comment on the politics of the day in Serbia because I'm a very long way away from that today. But I think if you see the European accession process as a game, as a political game, it's not likely to get very far. If you see it as a practical set of developments which are actually what the country should be doing anyway in order to become more prosperous and more secure, then the European accession process will follow because no one will have any reason to obstruct it. I'm sure that's what Britain would have said if Britain was still in the EU, but I think that's what the EU as a whole will believe too.
And it seems that the main question today for you and for all of us is pandemic, and I want to refer to that again. So how will pandemic will change our way of living? It's changing already because we are talking online. We don't see each other live, but how it will change our way of life and our way of doing business?
Question, and I don't think any one of us really knows the whole answer to that. I'm a little skeptical about radical changes in the way we live our lives because I think humans have been around for a very long time. Personal contact is extremely important, and I'm a little suspicious of those who think that's going to change dramatically. I think the majority of people the world over will want to, in some sense, get back to normal. And a certain amount of talk of new normal is job creation on the part of those who want to set themselves up as experts on the new normal. So I'm not totally convinced by that. But you're right about one thing, which I think is really important for Serbia and for the Western Balkans, and that is we are now talking virtually from a great distance, and I hope I'm being about as useful as I would be if I were with you there in Belgrade. I'm sorry I'm not with you, but the communication is very successful. A lot of people around me here in London at the moment are doing exactly the same. They're working from home. I suspect a lot of businesses will begin to look over time and say, well, if people can work from home in a suburb of London, maybe they could do that job just as well from Belgrade or Novi Sad or somewhere else. And I think there are opportunities there, particularly in the knowledge industries and in technology, for Serbia, for countries in the region where there are high standards of education, good knowledge of foreign languages, to be able to take advantage of that situation and to decentralize and, if you like, globalize some areas of business. And as far as Europe is concerned, of course, outsourcing doesn't have just to be to Europe. I used to work for an Indian business where a lot of outsourcing is done in India, but there's a lot of what is called mid-shoring. That's to say, let's say, Western European customers, businesses who want to have a base, but want it still within their own time zone, within their own cultural environment, and so on and so forth. And so there is an opportunity, I think, here to level up between Western Europe and say the Western Balkans, because technology has demonstrated not just that we got a stable internet line, but that we can actually do real serious business in this way. So I think there are opportunities which I'm sure businesses in the region are already looking at. And as a Chamber of Commerce, I would very much like us to be looking at some of those opportunities with Serbian companies too.
hope so that they will find their way to overall this crisis. And for this very end, there is a question, some would say it's a question worth $1 million. Who would say how do you see our region and how do you see EU and of course Britain in 1 year, regarding pandemics, all these challenges that we are talking about and Brexit?
I rather suspect that in a year's time, we will all be still facing some quite serious difficulties. I'm sure unemployment, particularly, well, certainly in the UK, is still going to be a problem. But I'm pretty confident that within a year, one way or the other, whatever the developments with the pandemic, whether there are vaccination treatments or whether actually the numbers, as I rather suspect, they just come down by themselves, we will see a positive way forward and an opportunity for growth. So no one would be, I think, foolish enough to suggest that everything will be right within a year. But I think that, if you're studying geopolitical threats, you worry about threats. If you're in business, you look for opportunities. So I think a business mindset looking for where the opportunities come will serve us all very well.
And what would you suggest in the meanwhile, what Serbia economically should do?
I think that the Serbian economy is obviously doing some of the right things. The numbers look pretty good in global terms these days. I think foreign direct investment is a real achievement, those results there. I think that Serbia needs to do two things, which I don't think need to be contradictory. Indeed, I think they can be compatible. One is to be very open economically to business from around the world. And the other is to have a very strong sense of what will make an economically as well as politically sustainable future in terms of structural reform, the rule of law, the kind of system which will attract good business and will attract young people back to the country.
I hope so. I thank you very much, Mr. Landsman. Thank you very much for joining us here at the Belgrade Security Forum, and I hope you will come here soon in Serbia. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us, and our next session will start in 30 minutes. Thank you.